Well, talking about a lead into a movie trailer.
What a transition.
Yeah, we're about to see that now, and the movie is called Choice. Let's take a peek at this, and then we'll talk to the people involved.
The decision is out. It's been issued by Justice Alito, and Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and the question of abortion has been returned to the states. It's been 50 years since that.
My heart and my head need to separate.
I couldn't believe that I was pregnant.
I felt just petrified.
Because a woman has to use her body for 9 months, she only should determine how her body is going to be used.
As a Black woman who's had 3 abortions in my life, what I didn't have was access to education.
Abortion never occurred to me because I would never do that.
It's a matter of us being able to live the way we want, a matter of us being able to afford access to care, and afford the rights to choose how we decide to live.
Why is like bacteria on Mars considered life, but not a fetus on Earth?
I wasn't sure what I was gonna do and where I was gonna be, so I didn't think it was gonna be fair to drag a baby along just trying to get my life back together.
I had in mind to make an abortion because I didn't feel myself prepared to be a mom.
You don't hear the woman sitting in her bedroom crying.
I knew that I just lost my child.
The role that poverty plays in the inability to make choices around your reproductive health.
These are human beings. You and I were once children in the womb.
The poorest 13% of Americans have half of the abortions. They're not having it because they think that it's a clump of cells. They're having abortions because they can't afford to have another child.
When we think about choice, we think about it as a yes or no type of situation, but we don't think about who has historically not been able to have the privilege to choose.
In one room, we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and the efforts of many, many people to save these babies. And in another room, not all that far away, we're ripping them apart.
I've murdered more people than Ted Bundy.
When the shootings happened, the whole town was reeling because it was a political crime.
When we consider the issue of reproductive justice, we have to think about who is really fighting for justice.
I can both believe that this is a living human being and still support a woman's right to choose.
I think the vast majority of people who call themselves pro-choice are empathetic with that woman's situation. The pro-life movement is empathetic with the child in the womb, but the common ground is empathy.
They didn't know who I was, and they didn't seem to care. They just knew that I was a person who needed help, and they held me. I don't think we should give up on the idea that there is a way that we can respect the life of the fetus and the rights of the woman.
And joining us now, Martha Byrne, a producer for Choice, and Mario Costabile, who is the director of the film. And after watching the trailer, and I've watched it a couple of times, where we heard women both pro-life and pro-choice, the question for me is, what kind of film is this? Because I am a staunch pro-life advocate with really no middle ground. So what is this film?
Well, the film is really intended to reach the peripheries, to reach people that are undecided about what their beliefs are. And often those beliefs change on a dime based on their circumstance or their circumstance of crisis. So the film is really to draw in all people of different persuasions, different positions on life and issues of choice, so we can really share and discuss the importance of the woman and her crisis and what the choices that are available to her.
And Martha, I find it unusual that you're involved in this film because you're an Emmy-award-winning actress, So how did you get involved, and why were you interested in it?
Well, one of my best friends in high school got pregnant, and I convinced her to keep the baby and give the baby up for adoption. So I wanted to, it was such a big part of my life. And when I met Mario, I've known him since I was 9 years old. This was such a personal issue for me. And I felt like we weren't listening to women enough. I felt like there was a lot of yelling and a lot of screaming, opinions, but we weren't listening to the women in that moment of crisis. So that's why I joined the film and wanted to help.
And is that part of the impetus behind this, Mario, is that people are just yelling back and forth, and when there's so much noise, there's no changing of hearts and minds, and there's no one listening. If we're yelling all the time, we don't listen. Is that what we're trying to do here?
What we're trying to do is to focus on the woman who's actually experiencing the crisis and seeing what her needs are. And often when people are staunch, they're just, like I said, people will shut down, people are yelling facts, they're yelling at their position, and people are close to that. What we want to do is we want to create a sort of a space where there's like-minded conversations. I mean, the film focuses on the empathy of the woman, what she's experiencing. So with that, we have that commonality, right? And then really showing the journey and how these choices are made. And these women sometimes are confronted with situations there as a lack of a choice because of their upbringing or because of what's presented to her, where her world is that she has to abort this child, you know, where the reality is that there are choices. So the film is about resources and what those choices might be. And we investigate very deeply what those choices are. There's only 3 of them. The first choice is you either terminate the child, and what does that look like, and what are the ramifications? The second is let's keep the child. Let's find a pregnancy resource center or family members that will help us, you know, keep the child and give life to that baby. The third is maybe offering the child up for adoption, and what does that look like, which most don't really talk about. And we investigate all those journeys.
Through real stories of women, from their voice.
And I want to target in on a word, Martha, that Mario used, and that's empathy.
Right.
Because I think most of us know somebody who has been touched by abortion, and how difficult that is for that person. And I think we have to separate the act from the person in the sense that we need to have empathy for people too.
Absolutely. We have to listen more instead of talking at. Because every woman has a different situation, and it's a crisis moment and a crisis choice. And who's going to be the first person that talks to them is the biggest influence on them, we learned. So the first person that they talk to when they find out they're pregnant is the one that really guides that journey for them. So we want to be able to get into we educate people more. There's not a lot of education. There's so many women that we work on the street, you know, you see these interviews and they ask them questions about how far along and what it means, and they don't know. And they don't understand the value either of their choices, also their future. When they make that decision, what does it look like? You know, we talk about open adoption in this movie. We talk about pregnancy resource centers. We really want to get the word out, but we also want to educate and get people to come to this film. But then we're also going to do a website afterwards where we'll have resources for people to go to in crisis. So if they facing a moment in the middle of the night where they don't know where to go, what's the first place people go? They go online and they get misinformation, strange information, yelling and screaming. And we want to be a landing page that is open to conversation, have live chats, and we're not trying to tell anybody what to do. We just want to give them the information so they can make the right choice for themselves. That's it, and that's what this movie is really geared toward.
Friend.
Yeah, like my high school friend. In that moment, if she didn't want to tell her parents, she was so scared, and I said, please just take a moment, let's talk to your parents. And when she did, they were accepting and loving and supported her. And she met her daughter a few years ago who thanked her for choosing life. And that's her story. That's her story, and that's a beautiful story. But there's a million stories out there that nobody listens to and doesn't have a person like me there to welcome them and give them love and support and listen and not tell them what to do. I was more about getting support for her, and I knew her family very well, and I knew that they would support her. She was just scared.
She was scared.
Yeah.
And Mario, so you have over 100 interviews. Where did you find these women? Because I'm sure that was extremely difficult.
Well, I gotta say, God led the way. I mean, I'd interview one person, and I'd say, "Is there anybody else that you can recommend that would share a similar story, or is there someone that is an advocate or a professional in the field? And it was just a multiple referrals that led to other referrals. There was a lot of research in trying to get people to speak and be interviewed on the film as well, that this is a good person in this field, we should get them on and share their expertise. Because we want the film to be balanced and neutral, but we do want the truth to prevail, you know? And the truth is healing. The truth is really enabling women to feel confident that they're making the right choice. And the truth does that, as you know. You know, so the film really goes deep into the reality of what these women are experiencing, more so than any other film I've ever seen.
7 years, right? You've been working
We've been working on it for 7 years, and there's never been a film of this nature where we really tried to present the film in an unbiased way and let the truth speak. You know, I found, and this is my own personal research, that 15% of the culture is staunch pro-choice. 15% of the culture is staunch pro-life. But there's 70% of the culture that's malleable and on any given moment could swing in any direction, which is kind of scary when you think about it. That is our audience. That's who we want to influence, not necessarily influence, but reveal the truth and the beauty of what the truth is, so there can be a choice that's made right for her.
And a conversation, and there's no rhetoric in this film. It's not, you know, there's no, again, no yelling and telling. No yelling and telling.
It's stories.
Yes.
It's stories.
Real stories from real women, real
It's
doctors,
stories.
real, you know, you can never discount a woman's real story and what they've experienced.
So you have an event tonight for our people who are in the Massachusetts area, because we're all over the place. It's in West Newton. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so there's a community, a pro-life community that has invited us to speak in Massachusetts. There's actually 2 events. We're speaking tonight at the West Newton Cinema. They've rented the entire theater for us. So anybody that's interested, that wants to come out and come on out and see a little bit more about what we're doing and what's going on and how to be part of it. We're about 80% complete in the film, so we're still trying to get over the finish line. So we're looking for resources, we're looking for support. And there's also another event at Our Lady Blessed Sacrament in Westfield, which is also Massachusetts, right?
Yes, yep.
Yeah.
So come on by.
And that's tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. as well.
You can even ask me questions about soap operas, and I'll sign autographs if you want. I'm happy to do that, but come on out.
If anyone wants to help to support the film or wants to know more about the film, where would they go?
Oh, you can definitely go to the website. It's choicetodocumentary.com. And there's excerpts on the website. There's information about the development of the film. There's ways that you can support the film as well. And we are a nonprofit entity, so any donations that you make is tax deductible.
Well, Mario, Martha, thank you so much for being with us
Thank
today.
you.
2 childhood friends.
Yeah,
That's
I guess
right.
we were. Yeah.
That's right.